What do you think about Toronto? What's your impression? How does it feel?
It just seems like a big, wonderful salad of so many different cultures and societies, and I'm really happy here. I feel comfortable. It just feels like everybody is welcome.
And how about the CN Tower? What do you think about that?
Well, I fly all the time, so it doesn't seem that high. It's pretty impressive.
Well, I can say you've been very welcome here. That's what's really amazing.
Yeah, I do feel really welcome.
Yeah, I think your consciousness and what you have to teach is it's very much in alignment with what a lot of people here are feeling, and they resonate with your message.
It felt that way. The receptivity of the audience was really impressive. I felt like everybody was paying good attention and that they got something out of it. And nothing makes me happier as a teacher than to experience that.
Thank you so much for coming to Toronto.
Anytime.
And here's Julie. Julie's here. Yes.
Prediction itself, I'm very uncomfortable with the whole idea of prediction because it annoys me if anybody thinks I'm predictable. It's funny, that's a very human thing to say. If I called you predictable, you'd smile, but take it as a vague insult, the way people playfully tease each other. And yet we so often will completely give away our God-given power of creativity and the ability to influence our own lives as we sit with an astrologer and just passively, like a deer in the headlights, say, tell me what's going to happen to me, as if the planets were doing it. We interact creatively and unpredictably with the archetypal fields that it is our fate to experience at certain times. So I'm pretty adamant about that. There are a lot of technical arguments in astrology, like which house system to use, and on and on and on. It's an endless litany of techniques. People say astrology. We really should say astrologies, plural, because there's so many different systems, and they disagree with each other. And people get very passionate about, what orb to use for the bisectile aspect or something. And I have no interest in that. It doesn't agitate me. I'm just not drawn to those arguments at all. But I do get passionate about the ethics of astrology. And I think rigid, specific prediction is morally wrong.
That's a very strong statement, but very provocative in a good way.
I think it's certainly provocative in a good way. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. The tendency of rigid prediction to disempower us, to weaken us, to move us in directions that are not as good as we could do. It insidiously interferes with our spiritual freedom and fouls up our karma. And so that's why I use a strong word like immoral.
And it also sounds like it doesn't honor our free will.
Bullseye.
Yes, free will it's such a huge part of how we've come to understand ourselves as human beings. Perhaps that's one of the main things that has changed or evolved about us since the origins of astrology, is that we acknowledge that we do have a free will, and that is part of the experience, the human experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting one. There's so much interest in academic, historical, recollection of astrological history now, and I'm not a scholar in that sense, and have no particular interest in it. I'm, really very much a modern astrologer. But one comment I'd make historically, my sense of it is I would divide the history of astrology into three phases, right from the beginning. And I'd start off here by saying that it's common nowadays to academically to say, well, astrology began in like the 2nd or 3rd century BC in Greece, although those Greeks said, no, we got it from the Egyptians.
And they got it from the Babylonians, and they got it from cave drawings, and yes.
There you go. Yeah, I think astrology has an ancient history actually, and the techniques are constantly shifting. But the point I want to make about these three ages is that we go back to like early history, and we imagine in various cultures, Egypt, Babylon, Mesoamerica, China, there are astrologer priests on the top of pyramids, or variations on that theme. And it's a familiar image, but when we think about what they were doing, they are attempting to divine the will of the gods from the planets. And the king is sitting there with his arms crossed, like, you better get this right.
Oh yes, divination.
Exactly. But think about it for a moment. The astrologers are kind of sweating and praying that they get it right, because the gods, in this cryptic fashion through the geometry of the planets, are making certain suggestions for, how we should behave. And maybe we're going to understand their message, and maybe we're not. Maybe we're going to get it right. Maybe we're going to screw it up, and then the king will chop off our head and appoint somebody else as astrologer priest. It's kind of, again, the cartoonish version, but it's approximately what was going on. We get the sense that it was a message from the living God manifest in the motion of the planets. And then, as astrology became more rationalized, as human civilization, I don't want to say advanced so much as unfolded, we entered into a more mechanical view of astrology, where the planets were not seen so much as messages from the gods, but something operating in a more of a clockwork universe kind of way. And it was in that second phase that astrology became rigid. And you notice that in the first phase, there was the fear that we might screw up and not get the message, which actually implied human freedom. And then the freedom went out of the system, and then as we got into maybe the 20th century, and psychology and astrology began to come together, we began to see a renaissance of this idea that existed so long ago, that human consciousness had a God-given power to make a total mess out of the message of the gods, or to get it right. So in a very strange way, we've come full circle in this third phase.
How do you think that these shifts reflect how we have changed as human beings? So these three distinct phases, what do you think that says about us?
Well, it's certainly what it says about us now. 5,000 years ago, I'm not sure, but right
You were around then. We should know that.
Oh, I'm not that old. But you're right.
Yes.
We are much freer. A few hundred years ago, if your last name was Taylor, nobody said, by the way, what do you do? Cultures tended to be rigid.
Yeah, you were labeled very clearly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
If you're born female, there's your career right there. Have babies.
Thank God that's changed.
Thank God that has
Yes.
changed, for the benefit of us all. So where I'm going with that is a very simple notion that we in fact enjoy a lot more freedom and the attendant uncertainties and anxieties nowadays than we did in more rigid cultural periods. And astrologers always have to adjust to the realities of their society. And in a more rigid society, I suspect rigid prediction was more relevant. Now that the culture has opened up in so many ways and people have many more possibilities, they can fall lower or rise higher, we're living in an age that is objectively characterized by more freedom, and the astrologers have to use that language.